Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to call today's meeting of the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness to order. First up is the introduction of late items. So under the chair's report, I'm going to add 5B, a little update on BC Transit funding and a fare review that's underway currently. And regarding the adoption of the agenda, we're going to reorder 7C to 7A.
That's correct. To consider item 7C prior to item 7A.
Right, we're going to consider 7C prior to talking about item 7A. So may I have a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended, moved by Jocelyn and seconded by Alexandria. All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. And we have the adoption of the minutes from our last meeting on March 13th. Does anyone have any amendments that they would like to make to those minutes? Not seeing any, may I have a motion for the adoption of those minutes? Moved by Nicole, seconded by Tammy. All in favor? Thank you, that carries unanimously. So moving on to the chair's report. So first up, I'd like to introduce a new member of our committee, Sarah Pop. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. And maybe I'll let you say a few words about why you were interested in joining our committee.
Sure. I work professionally as a librarian in public libraries in Ontario for many years. I'm from the island, and then became ill with chronic illness about three and a half years ago, and was unable to continue working and slowly began using mobility aids, came home, went on provincial disability, but still have a real heart for sharing resources and improving the lives of people, especially those who need support to speak up and to share their voice. So I was volunteering with a few organizations in town, and then I'm a Women Helping Women and Mamas for Mamas, and then decided to start my own group, Poverty Advocacy in Nanaimo, at the end of 2023. And I'm really pleased with how it's growing, but also felt like I still wanted to make sure that I was sharing my voice as far as making sure that the considerations of people with mobility aids and with special needs were being heard. So when I saw the posting, I jumped at it.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. We're super stoked to have you. Maybe if we'll do a really quick roundtable so the other members can introduce themselves to you, Sarah. So maybe Jocelyn, if you want to just start off.
Sure. Hi, welcome. I'm Jocelyn Mathon, and I work with Spinal Cord Injury BC from my home office in Nanaimo, and I have lived experience, and this is my second term.
My name is Nicole Sugiyama. I'm a longtime resident of Nanaimo. I am an occupational therapist by training, and I work at the Child Development Center. Lots of history with Parks and Rec and various things. I have 2 kids at home.
I'm Sean Enns. I'm an integrated services manager with the Nanaimo Association for Community Living, so we support adults with developmental disabilities. And I have a lot of lived experience with neurodiversity and advocating for neurodivergent adults and youth.
My name is Alexandria Stewart. I have a 26-year-old son who's autistic and labeled with an intellectual disability, and I also sit as chair on the board of Clay Tree Society.
My 14-year-old son is autistic.
Awesome.
I'm Tammy Hirasawa, and I'm a physiotherapist with the Child Development Center in Nanaimo, and I'm also the president of the Japanese Canadian Society here.
And then we have some of our members who are joining us online today. Maybe Bae, if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Bae Kinraid. I'm a student of sociology at VIU, a person with disabilities, a partner to someone with disabilities, and a parent of a child who just has ADHD and some intensive needs.
Thank you, Bae. Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy, This is my first year being on this board. I have 4 children, 3 out of 4 have a diverse ability. And I advocate for people in the community who need support. So I'm very involved with BC People First, and I'm the provincial advisor. I was on the community council, but I have to take a break from that. I'm sure there's lots more, but yeah. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Wendy. And of course, my co-chair, Councillor Armstrong, is online today.
Thank you, Cheryl Armstrong, my second term with the Accessibility Committee, chairing it the past 4 years, and now it's Hillary's turn. Looking forward to having you on board.
And we also have Richard Harlow online right now, and who said he wasn't necessarily available. Oh, I see him unmuted there, Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Harlow, born and raised here in Nanaimo, second term on the committee. I identify as a person with visual impairment and chronic pain, and I identify with the LGBTQ community. Have a psych degree and work with old folks, and I am an artist.
Thank you so much, Richard. So, yeah, great to have you joining, Sarah. And we have some staff who are supporting us. Maybe I'll quickly ask staff, starting with you, Darcy, to introduce yourselves.
Hi Sarah, welcome. My name is Darcy Osborne and I'm Director of Recreation and Culture. It's my first term as a staff liaison to the advisory committee, and so far it's been a very enjoyable experience. So welcome aboard. Thank you.
Hi Sarah, I'm Adrienne Mercer-Breen. I am Manager of Culture and Special Events, and I'm not usually here. I'm subbing in today for Laura Clarkson, who's Manager of Recreation Services. So I'm really pleased to meet you. Thank you.
Hi Sarah, I'm Carrie Ng. I'm the Director of IT for the City of Nanaimo here. I've joined this committee on a few occasions, and I definitely appreciate all the conversations that happen, and interested in terms of how city's IT can provide assistance for accessibility and inclusivity.
My name is Bill Sims. I'm the General Manager of Engineering and Public Works, so out on the streets, that's seems to be the place where we intersect, but also in facilities as well.
I'll do myself. I'm Richard Harding, General Manager of Community Services. I'm usually used to sit down where Darcy is, but I've given it over to a much more capable person down there, so I get to sit back here now and again. So welcome aboard. It's a great group in the second term. We got a lot of work done last term. We'll get a lot more work done this term.
Do you want to? Okay. My name is Amanda Daly. I'm one of the recreation coordinators. Right now I facilitate adult programming as well as our integration program and camp sensation in the summer. So I usually just sit back here and take some notes and bring it back to the rest of the recreation coordinators.
Registration day is today for camp sensation?
Yeah, the letters went out today for integration and sensation. So yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm Alyssa. I'm one of the recording secretaries.
I'm Natalie Spalmaville. I'm a communications advisor.
I'm Karen Robertson, Deputy Corporate Officer, so I do a lot of the liaising with the city committees.
And I'm Jessica Vanderwijk. I'm the Steno Coordinator in March Services.
Awesome. So we've got a great team at our table and supporting us, so really excited for where we're going to go from here.
May I ask?
Oh.
How many people are in the room and online?
Oh, sorry, Richard, you're asking how many people are in the room and online?
Yes.
19 people in the room, 4 people online, not including you. 4 people online,
Thank you.
including you. Yeah.
Thank you. So next up, I just wanted to provide a bit of an update because at our last meeting, we had a presentation from the regional district of Nanaimo staff about transit, and it was a really good conversation. And we talked about transit expansion plans, handy dart service, and all of that sort of being contingent on funding from BC Transit. So after that meeting, I sat in as an alternate director at the RDN's Transit Select Committee on March 28th and learned that BC Transit had approved a number of the RDN's requests, including another 10,000 annual service hours and 6 new natural gas buses. But BC Transit did not approve the request for weekend handy dart service, and that was 2,000 annual service hours and 3 vehicles. So the Nanaimo News Bulletin did report on that meeting, and they said that it did not sit well with committee members, and I can verify it did not. I spoke up first and I said that I found that really problematic due to them simply denying the funding request for handy dart service while funding other items, and I said that it seemed quite inequitable. We had Seth Wright from BC Transit there on Zoom at the meeting, and he responded that their overall goal is to harmonize handy dart with conventional service, but for capacity reasons, they declined to fund it this year, and next year we can ask for more to compensate. I will say the RDN is slightly ahead of other places because years ago we harmonized the cost of rides on conventional and custom transit. And we do have some weekend service and early evening service, and other areas are much further behind than us, so perhaps BC Transit may have evaluated the need in other places to be greater than ours. And he explained that the funding for conventional versus handy dart are considered to be in separate buckets. And so I said that framing it as 2 separate buckets is so deeply problematic as a way of looking at transit when we're talking about the equity of movement. The suggestion was, of course, to apply next year, and they are apparently exploring and reviewing their own expansion evaluation process. There was a question from Director Stanley about how the provincial accessibility mandate applies to BC Transit. Great question. The answer was that the mandate came through to local governments in a more significant way than BC Transit. And however, BC Transit does recognize that they haven't dedicated enough staff resources internally to serving and understanding and resourcing all aspects of the handy dart service provision. And they've hired consultants to develop a handy dart strategy as a Crown corporation, and that's apparently nearing completion. It's probably done now, and I'm going to loop back in about that. And they've hired more staff to support custom transit service. They're also looking at making it easier to identify accessible bus stops, which is more complicated because there's no clear definition of what an accessible bus stop is, because accessibility is different. Everyone's threshold is different, and in Canada we don't have a standard. So that's an issue. The board did follow up on that by writing a letter to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure to re-emphasize the importance and the rationale for implementing the RDN's transit redevelopment strategy, and basically request that the RDN be considered for any custom or conventional transit service hours allocated to other jurisdictions that may not be accepted by them. So we're like, give us whatever you've got. If anyone says no, we're here for it. Yeah. So all that to say, we have a lot of work to do on the accessibility side of transit. And so the RDN right now is in the process with BC Transit of asking bus riders for their thoughts on a potential hike in fares. There's a survey that's been posted to the RDN's website because they are looking at possible fare increases because the cost of everything is going up, as well as for the the Nanaimo to Cowichan Express route and for handy dart customers. So that fare survey is available through the RDN's website and through BC Transit until May 31st, and we're going to send a link to that to all of the committee members after this. You can also pick up a paper copy, and if anyone needs help doing that, please let me know. So thanks for your time on that. I just thought it was important to loop back on that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hillary.
So in the interest of time, we're going to move right into council communications, and for that, Karen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just what we do with each of the agendas when this committee makes a recommendation and it moves forward to council, we just like to report back as to when those motions get adopted. So the one before you about having staff to conduct assessment audits on a number of parks listed there, passed it to March 18th, 2024, regular council meeting, and I don't know if Ms. Osborne has any further information on it other than it's just ongoing, or?
I believe Mr. Bryson will be back to report in the fall on the progress on those audits.
Okay, so then we are moving into presentations. First up, we reordered 7C to be first, and so that will be introduced by Ms. Osborne.
Actually, I think Mr. is going to go first from IT just to give an update because we're in the room. And
right.
So we, from the last time that.
So we'll just get you to move up to the mic and talk right into it for those who are listening online.
Hi, everyone. From the last time that I was.
Can you hold the mic up?
Was that a little bit better?
Yeah.
Okay. From the last time that I was here, we were talking about assisted listening devices, and we came to the conclusion that there was going to be an investment of 3, one of which is a speaker and the microphones and the lanyard that Hillary has, or Councillor Eastmer has, and the 2 intercom T-loop systems that have been installed at the facilities that Darcy can talk to you about. We received the equipment about a couple of weeks ago, and this is the first time we're trying it.
Oh.
And you can tell by just the confidence in my voice that but we did a test run earlier this afternoon, and just with Councillor Eastmer's voice from the speaker, from the little kind of iPhone looking devices next to her right hand, it seems to be working, and what we really like about it, it just elevates the speaker's voice so that it kind of cuts through any of the noise that's going on from any of the ambient noise, so it's a bit clearer. So on the table as well, you'll see there's 2 gray microphones. Now the really interesting thing, and maybe not so interesting thing about these microphones and that lanyard device, is they're very direct. So whereas a microphone such as this could pick up maybe speakers around, those microphones are pretty much 1-to-1. So as you have it in front of you, it'll pick up your own voice. But for example, if I was sitting beside you and the microphone's in front of me, chances are it wouldn't pick up your voice. So that we do have to maybe be a bit strategic in terms of how we want to position them so that they can pick up most of the voices as they're speaking, because just by sitting there and having Councillor Eastmer's voice through here, it seems a lot clearer, and it can be picked up a little bit easier for the room. So.
I was just going to ask, so would you recommend that for the committee members sitting at the table, that when they're speaking, that they move whichever mic is closest to them directly to them to pick them up?
If that's agreeable with this group, yeah, I think that would be wonderful, because it'd be a great experiment for us, and then we can just kind of keep on tweaking as this is the first time we're using it, and so we'll get increasingly better in terms of our capability with it. So. The system is here. I'm really quite happy about what I'm hearing. So literally,
it sounds better here on this side too.
Oh, that's great here. Thanks so much for confirming that. And then any feedback that you can provide afterwards will be wonderful, because this could be the start of perhaps other investments that we'd want to do in different rooms and other facilities throughout the city.
Does anyone have any questions?
I do.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nicole.
I just want to confirm. We have to turn it on, right?
So the button right there, exactly. So now you've unmuted it, so it should be on.
Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I had to press it twice.
Okay.
Just for everybody's. We have a system similar.
If you see if it's red flashing, that means it's on mute. And to unmute it and to mute it and mute and unmute is the one button on top.
Okay.
Any other questions at all?
Councillor Armstrong?
I'm just saying, for me, I'm getting a bit of feedback, and then your mic is not coming through clear for mine, so maybe it's just my connection, but yeah, I don't know if others are feeling on that either, but for me, I was getting feedback.
Is anybody else hearing that?
Yeah, and I'm having a really hard time hearing the mic at the podium.
Yeah, me too. Very hard.
Good to know. We will work on the kinks for sure.
And you're coming in and out. Somebody's coming in and out.
Okay, that could be this mic. which I could wear if that makes it easier to hear.
It's better.
Might be directional, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. Sean?
I think you just have to leave it now once it's unmuted.
Oh,
There you
okay,
go.
that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Is there an opportunity, I don't know if anyone in this room today requires any hearing aids or assisted, you do?
No, I don't.
You
I was
don't?
gonna ask the same
Okay.
question.
We had a member last year.
You do, okay, so can you comment whether it's an improvement for you?
It is an improvement, yeah.
Great, okay, that's what I was curious about, because I can hear pretty well most of the time, so I don't know if it, I mean, it's definitely louder, but I don't know if it's an overall improvement, but it's good to know that the people who need it are benefiting.
And just to confirm, is the mic that's at the podium, is that a new mic or the one that's been here in previous meetings?
It's not new one, no, it's the one that's been used in previous meetings.
Okay. Maybe it's just tired. I know it does tend to run out sort of halfway through meetings sometimes too. The battery life on it is not the best. Ms. Robertson, did you have something to add?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Does it come out?
The microphone does come out of the stand, yes.
So the mic does come out of the stand if that's easier, not to lift the whole stand.
So the mics on the table can be picked up and held in your hand if that's easier, and we'll just try to remember to angle them towards whoever's speaking.
And it seems like when it's picking up sound, it turns green.
Yes.
That's that, yeah.
You are much more clear now.
Okay, now I'm clear, but
Better.
I didn't see that one turn on when Sean started speaking.
No, it's not picking me up at all right now. So you would have to, I can.
Yeah, there
So
you
when
go.
it's pointed at me, it turns green, but if it's just sideways like that, it's not doing anything.
Sorry for our people on Zoom.
We're all just learning together in a safe space.
This is
Yeah.
how we learn.
Yeah, exactly.
I would just like to give an update on where we are at with the hearing loops that have been installed into our facilities. So April 23rd, we installed the hearing loop at the Nanaimo Aquatic Center and at the Bowen Complex front office. And we had a little bit of issue with microphone. Imagine. But we worked through that solution and sort of changed a little bit around the type of product we were using and have been functioning since then, no problem. The clients who come up to the counter automatically can link through Bluetooth. And so it's very discreet and inclusive, and to the point where staff don't even necessarily know that they're utilizing the service. So we don't specifically have a lot of feedback from people of any negativity. We've only had positive feedback. And we are thinking that we might perhaps put out some surveys to see if people are using it or have some opportunity to share with us their experience, because we really quite honestly don't know if they're using it. But what I wanted to point out at this particular time is that the initial motion to form a committee and look at assisted hearing devices in our recreation facilities and boardrooms was originally passed by the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness back on June 7th, 2023. So it's taken us a little bit of time to go through the process of having the motion approved through council and then having the funding source allocated and working with a working group to identify what would be the best items and devices to purchase and utilize and test. But this is a pilot project, so feedback is really important amongst your groups and your community contacts. If you're hearing anything, please share please share with us that feedback so that we can know whether to move forward with similar devices or not. And it also just speaks to the value of this committee and what you bring to our community and helping us serve our members of our community. So that's our first sort of checkbox. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you so much for that. And so maybe what we learned from that is that our podium mic needs work, but we'll get there. Okay, next up we have a presentation about accessibility, inclusion, and special events. And Adrienne Mercer-Green is going to introduce this for us.
Hi, everyone. My introduction will be brief. As I mentioned, I'm manager of culture and special events, and I'm delighted to invite Megan Lum up here to give this presentation. She is recreation coordinator of special events for a little while longer. We're losing Megan for a really good reason because she's moving over to the aquatics team to be the assistant manager of aquatics. And as she, we didn't know that when this presentation was scheduled, but it's all the more reason why it's really helpful to us to come to you and find out from you how we can be better and do better and improve as we continue to put on events throughout the city and to support events throughout the city. So please welcome Megan.
Side is there. Okay. Darcy.
Close. Really close.
Yeah.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. As Adrienne said, my name is Megan Lum. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the special event coordinator for the City of Nanaimo for a little bit longer. I've had the privilege of being in this role for a couple of years now and find the events to be just a really amazing way to get the community together. So I'm happy to talk about this, and I'd love to hear some feedback as we get closer to the end of the presentation around anyone's experiences or thoughts around accessibility and inclusion in our events. So just really quickly, just to acknowledge this afternoon that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo people, and this is where we do our fabulous work. So community events, festivals, these are just a major way that we gather people together in the community. These events and festivals are a focal point for people to come together and share experiences in our community. As part of City Plan, it is noted that events are an open invitation for members of the community to access and participate in events, festivals, tournaments, and gatherings. And so the team that I work with, our Culture and Events Department, works to support event organizers, both hosted by the city and with different groups, to bring these things to life. We have a number of connection points to the Integrated Action Plan, including maintaining an downtown event revitalization fund, which provides grant funding to event organizers who are putting on events in Nanaimo, and working with Tourism Nanaimo and the Nanaimo Hospitality Association to bid for and attract events and conferences and things that happen in the off-season so that we're kind of keeping the city activated all year round. And some of our ongoing immediate actions are including working with our First Nations partners, iSpark, which is the Indigenous Sport, Physical Activity, Recreation Council, and other partners, as we work towards a bid to host the North American Indigenous Games, and implement sport tourism strategies, which include focus on Indigenous sport, all things cycling, paddling sports, individual or small sport disciplines, adaptive sport, and sport as business. So those are some of our priorities in the sport tourism area that are connected to the work that this committee does, as well as the special events team. I'm sure you're familiar with the ACAI work plan, so I won't spend too much time here, but that we are looking at, or the connection here with the accessibility within our parks and our open spaces and our facilities where we're hosting many of these events, and that expertise and advisory information and feedback that this group will have the expertise to be able to help us inform some of our processes as we move forward. So downtown event revitalization funding. This is a pretty amazing resource that we have in the community for event planners. So for folks who are looking to run an event in downtown Nanaimo, we have $250,000 available annually as grant funding to help event producers pull together their event and offset some of those major costs that are associated with hosting in Nanaimo. The intention of the grant is to revitalize or to recognize the value that initiatives have in building vitality downtown and enhancing Nanaimo's profile as a destination of choice. You'll see, I'm sure you see examples of it all summer. The night market is one of the events, Blues Festival, Pride Festival, all kinds of things are funded through the Downtown Event Revitalization Fund. So it's a really critical program in making sure that our events are able to continue. When we talk about accessibility and inclusion in events, we're always encouraging our event organizers to be looking at their plans with a lens of how we can have accessibility. So when we are having our contracts go out to our performers and different vendors who are working with us, we include language from the city plan around that those folks need to be presenting in a accessible way. And that's a current drawn from the city plan, but we are looking at kind of more finalized version of that, but just to really kind of pave the way that everyone that we're working with is working on the same guiding principles that we are in regards to accessibility and inclusion. We're also working with event organizers to make sure that their plans include accessible parking, access points for folks with mobility issues, and then adding in elements like transit shuttles or scheduling that can allow for more folks to be part of this, as well as a bike valet service and just kind of reducing some of that parking pressure and making sure that folks who get around in different ways and are not using a vehicle can get down and be part of the community events. So some other events, so we have a couple that are, well, more than a couple, but a number of events that are hosted and produced by the City of Nanaimo staff. And these two are some that kind of sit in my portfolio, Canada Day and the Concerts in the Park series. And something to highlight about these events is that in most cases we're aiming to put events forward that are low or no cost, and so that they're hopefully as barrier free as possible when folks come out to these events, so that they can bring their family and enjoy a day of entertainment and activities without having a financial barrier in the way.
Here on.
Large scale, yeah, that's the one. I think I got a little click. So with large-scale community events, of course, the city doesn't produce all the events that happen in the cities. In a lot of cases, the role that myself and Adrian within our team has is to support other event organizers as they find their way through all the nooks and crannies as you get your permits and your things in place to have events. So these are operated by a volunteer board of directors. Sometimes they're by different not-for-profit agencies and different partners throughout the community. So things like the Silly Boat Regatta, which benefits the Child Development Center, Pride Festival, Marine Festival, VIX, Dragon Boat. We also work on events that are multi-partner community events. So an example of that might be the 2023 Junior All-Native or the JANT tournament that was here and hosted in partnership, led by Nanaimo First Nation, and then our team partnered to help support with that event. And the Commercial Street Night Market, that's really driven by the Chamber of Commerce, but we support with logistics around that. And then the special events team, one of the things that we do, which is actually our busiest part, we're headed into May and June, which is very busy for us, is working through pre-event meetings with all of these event organizers. So getting all the right people at the table to talk about what is the transportation plan, what is the parking plan, what is the emergency access plan, what is the emergency response plan, have we thought through all those different pieces. So we do a lot of cross-departmental collaboration to ensure that the right people are at the table and getting the information that they need, and that we're solving the problems ahead of time so that when folks arrive at our event, they're having a successful and positive experience. Now it doesn't want to click at all. Oh. Natalie's got me. Okay, that's great. So independent events, as I kind of touched on, that is the majority of the events that are happening in our community out there. A lot of them are annually, quite a few of them receive funding from us to be able to operate. The allocations team and our team, we work very closely with these event organizers. We have sometimes multiple emails going back a day or phone calls. So just before I came to this meeting, the allocation clerk popped in and she said, hey, this person just called, and all she used was a first name, and I knew exactly which event she was talking about. We connect on a daily basis to make sure that folks are getting what they need and that they're answering their questions as they go through the process. Our job is really to function as super connectors and to make those connections between people who, you need to talk to this person, or have you considered this, and let's look at the broad picture here to make sure, again, that everything is successful. So some examples of our interdepartmental collaborations. We work with the transportation team around bike valets, transit shuttles, and coordinating road closures, things like parades. In the planning section, we work with community groups. So most recently, we worked with the Central Vancouver Island Multicultural Society through the planning section to do a welcome event for newcomers to Nanaimo. In the permits and business licensing area, we're looking at special event permits, food truck permits, filming permits if there's anything happening in our parks. And the parks team are somebody that I talk to daily just around how are we coordinating, maintenance and things that are happening in the park, what needs to happen. We don't want to spike something into the grass and hit a water line. We need the grass mowed before the event happens this weekend. What are all the things that are happening there? We work heavily with community safety, so the fire department, bylaws, our community safety officers, and our emergency program manager and RCMP partners to make sure that all of those folks are up to speed on what's happening, and also so that they have a chance to provide some feedback prior to an event on what are some other things that we might want to consider, again, to make sure that folks are safe. Sanitation, we talk about waste management and also some sustainable options, more sustainable options for event organizers. We are hoping to work towards a green event designation within the city so that as events planners come in, that they'll have a really skookum plan in place to be able to reduce the amount of waste that they're producing, compost what they can, recycle and reuse what they can, and that will just generally take the waste that's produced from events down. And then into communications, we connect with our communications team fairly heavily into media releases and coordinating if there's information that needs to go out on social media or, again, to the various city departments. And then community collaborations. So we work, again, almost weekly with Tourism Nanaimo, the Hospitality Association, the Downtown Nanaimo Business Association, and Chamber of Commerce. We just have lots of overlap with those groups. Part of our portfolio with events is also looking at tournaments and sport tourism. So those connections with Tourism Nanaimo and the Hospitality Association are especially critical when we're looking at bidding for an event and then helping to support those event organizers. And then cultural partners that we work with on various projects as well, including the Nanaimo Art Gallery, the Port Theatre, and the Nanaimo Museum. So that's the discussion. This is maybe the most fun part here. So we're keen to learn from the advisory committee about how your experience has been with events and how we can improve the way that we plan, or if there's pieces that we're missing along the way. So we had kind of some discussion questions here around what's your experience been with events in Nanaimo, and if you go or you don't go, why? What are some of the things that are maybe holding you back from participating? And how can we support major events in a more accessible and inclusive way to make sure that this is good for the community?
Okay, so I'm going to start a speakers list. So first up, I've got Wendy, followed by Jocelyn, and just I see Bay there as well. So we'll start off with folks. Wendy.
Hi, I'm with the Dragon Boaters, and I'm wondering if I haven't organized any of it, but I am a Dragon Boater. If they have applied for any funding, and whether they could get some.
Yeah, so
we're trying to scrape all the money together to get some support. So.
And Dragon Boat's been in a bit of a flux this year, as you probably know. So there was some timelines around the grant funding that we had available for that. So with the local community coming together to bring the event back, I think it would be great. I'd love to reach out actually and encourage them to apply for the Downtown Event Grant Fund. They don't have any funding for this year right now, but that would be something that they could certainly apply for in the future, because Maffeo Sutton Park absolutely fits into that criteria.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Wendy. And I think we're going to try to kind of keep our comments not specifically focused on exact events and whether or not they got funding, but I think we've got 3 really good questions here that we can try to work through. Jocelyn.
Thank you. I'm a huge fan of the downtown events. I came from Vancouver, where they were often just prohibitively difficult to participate in because of cost and distance and transportation and stuff. And we've been very appreciative of just there's a certain season in Nanaimo where it's like a parade every weekend. And I kind of love it. And then we really love the night market. And I've sort of comment, which is probably more for the night market organizers, but as a general principle, I am curious whether, my comment is that of late, they've moved the food trucks into one kind of extremely busy and congested part of the Diana Call Plaza. And my experiences with that were quite difficult in terms of physical access. And friends of mine who are autistic, they just couldn't even consider it. The noise was too great, and the proximity and the kind of enclosure. And I think that was a really interesting point to me as like two kind of different requirements that are both affected by that location. And I think I know logistically so many things to consider there, as well as food truck. Food provision for any event is really difficult for wheelchair users. So I don't have a great answer, but I think that might be worth considering when you work with different partners. And the more general comment I have about it is I've always been interested in cities providing cultural grants like this, having some kind of expectations around baseline accessibility levels or efforts toward them. And I'm curious whether your department involves that if in your grantees. And full disclosure, my organization has a small, like a social event grant, and we are to do some adaptive rec stuff. And but I'm just curious on the whole, when tournaments or other kinds of events that you work with or award funding to, if there's any kind of expectation of accessibility.
I think Adrian's going to come up as well, but I can speak really quickly that I know that we are meeting with the night market, and they have some plans in place to do a little bit of site changing around, which is really exciting. So I imagine that will be out there in a little bit. Whether it will address exactly that, I'm not sure, but that's really great feedback for us to take to the table. So thank you very much for bringing that up and for the comments around being able to access food at events from a food truck and stuff. I think that's a really important lens, and thank you.
I just want to add too, and I know Megan already mentioned it in her presentation, but we have borrowed from City Plan for both our Downtown Event Revitalization Fund grants and our Culture Operating and Project grants to put that language into all of our grant information and into the applications, so that it is in City Plan already, but it's right there in the material. And that we did that because that had already been approved, and we were aware that this committee would be producing a statement of accessibility and inclusion as part of the work plan, and that would then become the overall language that we would embed in our grant applications and information that's provided to folks, because we really, this is the committee that it would come from, and then that is the expectation that's going out into community.
That's great to hear. Thank you. So I have Nicole, then Sean, and then Richard.
Oh, okay. Okay, two thoughts. One, and this goes back to when we hosted Hockey Day in Canada a while ago, and I was happening to be using a wheelchair that day. And the cords, the sound cords, power cords, I don't even know what they were, but those created, so in Maffeo Sutton at the time, the accessibility was even worse than it is now. And then we added cords everywhere, and I think there was mud and boards. It was terrible. So I think sometimes it's not the built environment that gets in the way, it's the stuff that we bring in for events. And I think we have to be really thoughtful about properly covering and wrapping those obstacles. The other thought I had is a lot of the events involve speakers at the microphones, and there is no, as of yet, I've seen, there's an amplification system, but there is no ASL or voice to text transcription or anything like that for users who cannot understand it's spoken in the way that it is in the microphones. It's often very hard, even as a person who generally hears things, to hear in a public setting, and then to have in that really loud environment, but then to also have pretty much all of the cultural, all the speeches, all of that stuff inaccessible to anybody who's not sitting right beside the loudspeaker.
Those are really great comments. Thank you.
Sean.
Thank you. So to the first one, I'll answer each of the questions in order. I'll put this in front of me. Okay, so my experience, generally city-run events tend to be pretty good. I think the city has a decent understanding of accessibility and often will provide ASL or other services when they're doing things, trying to make things accessible. So for big city-run events, they tend to be pretty good. It's an independent community event, so I think the challenge is that they don't know how to be accessible, so you don't know what you don't know. And so it's really a risk for anyone with a disability to participate in an event, particularly, I don't want to beat the transit horse, but I will, particularly when it can take a long time to get to an event. If you're in the North End and you're catching a bus downtown, that's at least an hour to get there. You get to an event, it's not accessible in whatever way because they don't know what they're doing or they haven't made that information available in advance, and then you have to turn around and leave. So that's a pretty significant chunk of time for somebody that that would have benefited from that. So I would say to that point, either if there's a metric of accessibility that the city is able to say, here's the kit for things you should do to make your event accessible, and here are the connections to do them. As connectors, you can support organizations in making those choices or accessing resources to do that. Then an event can advertise itself as being an accessible event under whatever the standard is, and that'll make those decisions easier for people to take those risks and participate. If I do not typically attend, the barriers that keep me from attending, not accessible information to know what's happening. So you have to be pretty good at finding out what's happening to find out what's happening. You cobble information together from a number of sources. Sometimes things are happening, sometimes you find out at the last minute. It's not particularly accessible. So someone with maybe a learning difficulty or people with other barriers might find it really difficult just to know what's happening. I've planned a lot of events in this town, and I'll say that the thing people most frequently say to me is that they didn't know it was happening, and it's not for lack of trying. Like you can do, we do newspapers and social media and a million things, and people still have no idea. So I think having accessible ways to find out what's happening that are, and I don't know what that looks like, if it's a single accessible portal or if people can submit to the city in some way and the city can make sure that information is accessible. I think that's particularly valuable to all users. And how we can provide and support major events in a more accessible and inclusive way is bringing in people who can assess whether an event is accessible and inclusive. I mean, there are some criteria when we look at an event and we can ask questions and say, of organizers and say, is this inclusive? Are you including people from underrepresented groups in your event? Are you ensuring access? I'm part of a program that's doing a summer theater festival at Mythfeo Sutton. And it's accessible sort of, but it's also not super accessible because of the grass, and if the grass is wet, it's a whole problem. As has been pointed out, it can get muddy and it can get this other stuff. So these are real conversations that we have, and we don't actually know how to fix these problems. The city can say, look, you're going to be in a space, there may be considerations for people who have challenges accessing that space. Here's the solution to that problem. We provide the role, I can't remember what it's called, but the same ones that are at the water.
Oh, that?
Yeah. We provide those, or we can make those available to event organizers who are having things in uneven surfaces for people with mobility challenges. Any number of things, working with people so that they can understand transit and handy dark schedules when they're accessing spaces, particularly if they're new organizers. And a kit really, I mean, if there's I think one of the things people struggle with is that they come an event, every city is unique in how people plan events, and how cities organize and who you have to talk to. You already know as city staff what needs to happen to do an event. So I think sometimes event organizers get into the weeds of that stuff of like, who do I need to talk to? What licensing do I need? If there's just a list that's accessible to everyone, then they can just go through that stuff, which is the main function of it. And then you have more time and energy to think about making it more accessible or inclusive.
That's great.
Yeah.
And thank you. That's really why one of the reasons that we're here today is to take that is great feedback for us to take back and to kind of put into our work plan, but also to communicate to event organizers around, hey, here are some of the challenges that are really happening out there for folks that are trying to get to your event and they're trying to learn about this. And I think the more information that we can share with those groups as well, the better. And hopefully, yeah, that will help us to move towards some solutions. Yeah, thank you so much.
So I have Richard, and then Bay, and Alexandria.
Can I be placed last?
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes. Bay.
Hi, yeah. There's a few things, and some of them have been mentioned. One of them is the shuttle for events. Last time I checked, it was only a shuttle coming from North Nanaimo to downtown. Has there been any additions to include South Nanaimo, Central Nanaimo, areas where a lot of people may not actually have cars and the buses to get there can be challenging? The other thing was crowd management, I think is a big issue that should be looked at. You go to these events and like someone mentioned, there's enormous crowds of people in lineups and enormous lineups for everything from washrooms to food trucks. And like if you're walking with a cane, people can't see your cane because you're jammed in there. And so they bump into you or they trip on your cane. And if you're in a wheelchair, you're even lower down so people can't see you. And it's just, it's very overwhelming. And, then you get air quality issues. People are smoking and there's no resting areas. Sometimes there's no benches. There's no chairs near the lineups. So people who can't stand for extended periods, they pretty much have to bring their own food or go somewhere else. Yeah, that's one of the big issues. I wondered if anyone had considered capacity management for large events like the night market, where it gets crowded to a certain point that it's kind of dangerous, really, with that many people and tripping and. Yeah, that's my suggestion, is perhaps managing the capacity of a certain area. And the idea of a kit has come up in this discussion. It might be good to have an idea of what capacity a certain area, say Diana Krall Plaza, can sustain safely. Another thing is you could perhaps make access lanes where it's a no standing zone. It's people who are moving from one point to another, or areas that are specifically for people with mobility issues or visual issues. If you're using a cane to help navigate, then I gotta imagine it's pretty useless in a crowd like that. Yeah, that's my. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the crowds are big, certainly at some of those events. I definitely hear you on that. I think that's a great. I know we're taking some notes here, of course, as part of the meeting minutes. But Adrian and Darcy are jotting some notes beside me as well. And I know, crowd capacity also connects to where we talk about emergency and evacuation plans and that kind of thing as well. So I think that that's really great, that we'll take that kind of one step further as we start to look ahead as to what we can do. But those are some really great points. About the shuttles, I can say that for the Canada Day celebrations, we're working on a shuttle from the north and the south end. And I'm working with another event organizer who's looking at a shuttle from the central section of Nanaimo in addition to that. At this point, the shuttles are organized, if the event is being organized by an organization that's not the City of Nanaimo, those event organizers are making the request to transit separate from us, so we're not always aware of what kind of the plans are until it's more further down the line and ready to roll out. But I think that, again, that's another good piece of information we can bring back to those organizers to just be really cognizant of where those locations are for pickups and drop-offs, and that it's not going to take you an hour even get to the shuttle location just to make it easier to get to and from an event. So yeah, thank you for that.
So I'm going to Alexandria and then Sarah and then Richard.
Thank you. Two things, please. I was hoping you could clarify whether the grant and contracts language currently includes an accessibility statement, or whether that's something that's under development. And then I also wanted to ask if you had mentioned a green event designation was something that was under development. I wonder if an accessible event designation would be something that you could look at as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, well, I think we'll put that down as something to look at as well. I can speak to the contracts. So we do have an accessibility and inclusion clause in our contracts for the grants, which is, like Adrian said, is pulled right out of the city plan. And that's kind of our interim measure until we understand that there's more of a statement coming from this committee as part of the work plan. And so that's what we'd like to integrate in more fully once that's been flushed out by this group. But in the interim, we have a statement that as groups are awarded their funding and that's approved by council, the next step is that they return a form to us, that they sign off on all the conditions, and that's one of the conditions that they sign off on.
And a follow-up question, do we have a timeline around when we'll have this language that is to go into the contracts?
I can speak to that. I think that would be within the term of this. Oh, sorry.
Thank you for the reminder. Yeah, that would be within the term of this committee. So it is in the work plan, and it would be something that we would work towards over the next year and a bit. So
a year and a half until we get this done. Okay, thank you.
Or sooner.
Well, that's like prioritize.
Yeah.
It is within the work plan. So.
Sarah and then Richard.
Hi there. I first of all wanted to address the fact that the events that I do go to, as someone who lives with a disability, my son and I, we are extremely low income. And so I really appreciate that you mentioned barrier-free, because any city events that we go to are the free ones. And, really keeping that economic perspective in mind when you're thinking about the accessibility portion, because it's not just about how disability affects our bodies, it's about how it affects our lifestyle. So removing the economic barriers, especially from the city-run events, I think is integral, and I really appreciate that that's a focus, so thank you. The question, if you do not typically attend, what barriers keep you from attending? I live with a lot of anxiety about, is this event going to be able to accommodate me in my mobility aid? And so, what Sean touched on about communications being a key part, it would mean so much. I mean, I compile a list every week of free events going on in the city as part of my own initiative that I use to support low-income people. And so I see all the posters from the city for all the events. It would mean a lot if there was some kind of reference to adhering to accessibility protocols as developed by the city, or this is how, even in the Facebook post, this is how we're making sure it's accessible for people. We're going to make sure that there's paths without cords, or we're going to make sure, because to be honest, I would love to go to the night market, but I get really worried that, and obviously that's a combination of it's not just the city running the night market, but that's just one example. As I get scared, my son's autistic, I'm like, okay, he's gonna get overstimulated and I don't know if there's anywhere safe for him to calm down, you know? So I think more communication around the adaptations being offered or the accommodations being offered would make it feel more welcoming, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that speaks to Alexandria's point around that accessible event designation and having that communicated out really clearly. So that's definitely a theme that I'm hearing, and it sounds like, yeah, that would be really helpful. I don't want to speak on the night market's behalf, but last year they did have a kind of an accessible space for people who needed some space away from crowds and things. So I'll see if I can find that information again and share that back out.
Richard, and then back to Wendy.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm in a better place now. So I can personally say that there has been improvements over the last several years at events generally, as event organizers have become more aware of accessibility needs. But where things have kind of fallen short is inconsistencies between like 1 week of night market and the next week, for instance, or like one parade and another. One thing that I think was the most accessible parade that I've ever attended was the Vancouver Pride parade, because they actually had a booth specifically for people with hearing, visual, and mobility impairments, where they had people trained to describe the event and to sign the event as the people were going by, because a parade is just a whole bunch of cars honking and people walking down the street if you're blind. And they had also all the people that were like helping out at like intersections and stuff were kind of more trained to be able to give descriptions and knew how to describe the space to someone who's visually impaired to navigate a little bit easier. I think having these types of people who can like describe the event helps in spaces like a crowded night market where it's hard for people to navigate. And for me, I've also experienced definitely a lot of tripping hazards at these types of events. But it's not just sometimes cables not being covered or stuff like that, but sometimes it's even like scaffolding at head level. So I think if there was some also like a section on events that actually properly outlined all the steps that they're making to make events accessible would definitely make an improvement. Or if there was like an ambassador at events to be able to respond to questions or something like that. And yes, bathroom accessibility has always been an issue for a lot of people with mobility impairments, where I specifically work with adults with diverse needs, and they specifically say that they can't go to these events because they know that there's not going to be an accessible washroom. So, yeah.
That's really great feedback again. I'm glad to hear that things are slowly improving. I know we definitely saw some changes in event organizers as a result of kind of the COVID pause that occurred for a couple of years. Organizations had changes of boards of directors or folks who were organizing. So there was some kind of rebuilding that we've been doing. And if some of those things have been lost, even around accessible washrooms, that's, again, important for us to take back to those organizers and have those conversations. Thank you again.
Thank you, Richard. And Wendy.
Yeah, you talked about, no, I don't usually go to events because my son's anxiety is we could get there for 5 minutes and then he's out of it. So unless I go by myself, I cannot attend them. And that's nothing that you can do unless you want to take him away, just, you know, come get him and take him away. But we can't attend them with my son. So,
yeah. Thank you.
And you need to be able to make that choice to yourself and your family.
Definitely.
Thank you, Wendy. Richard, is your hand up again, or is that a holdover?
One thing that I think would be definitely great would be actually having like encouraging organizations to have committees or people that are actually of the representation to help, in a sense, give sort of advocacy and such internally. Because I know like some organizations are starting to do that, but it definitely helps when there's people of the demographic able to speak up and assess like the event before it starts or something like that.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, strong point. Listening to people with lived experience, always a priority, ideally before an event. Does anyone else have any comments they'd like to make before we move on from this topic? I think these have been really excellent comments and feedback. Thank you so much to the committee. Makes me really proud of the work that you're doing here, because this is really the helpful frontline stuff we need to hear to be able to improve.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Megan. So that brings us to our last presentation of the day, which is about public art and culture initiatives. And Adrian is going to introduce this one for us.
Thanks so much. So as I mentioned, I'm manager of culture and events. You've heard from Megan Lam, the special event coordinator, and now I'd like to introduce you to Jamie Brett-Sine. She is the recreation coordinator for cultural services at the city.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Brett-Sine. I am the culture coordinator, as Adrian said. I was thinking, how long have I been with the city now? So it's just about a year now, so not too terribly long, and had recently moved from Alberta, but have worked in arts and culture pretty much my whole life. So the presentation I have for you today is a bit of an overview of a number of projects we are working on presently or have recently completed. But I think it gives you a good broad overview of a variety of the things we do within the cultural sphere. Is this working for me now?
Probably not.
There we go. Starting with the 2024 street banners. So hopefully some of you have seen these going up around town. We do a street banner design program yearly, and for 2024, we were looking to recognize the 150 years since the incorporation of the city of Nanaimo. So that was in the call that went out to artists and designers when we were asking for proposed designs. Now, the winning design was by a local artist named Amy Pye. Could move this down slightly. And you can see that here on the screen, and of course you've seen it around town as it's gone up. And she featured urban and rural imagery in connection to the natural environment, so the land, sea, and the sky. So when you're looking at that design, you can see the 150. That is the acknowledgement of those of that significant date, but done in a really beautiful aesthetic that speaks to more of what we appreciate in our natural environment here in Nanaimo, and also what makes this area unique. Next, of course, is our Culture Awards. We actually recently celebrated these in April, and these were our winners. So this happened at the Port Theatre. This is a free event, a free annual event, where we recognize the best of arts and culture in our community, or certainly at least highlight some of the best. Our emerging cultural leader this year was Annalise Lamb, who is an incredibly talented Highland dancer. Our excellence in culture went to Paul Roland Gogo. And our honor in culture went to Suki Sangha. So that was a really wonderful event where we got a chance to really recognize arts and culture as a community as a whole, while highlighting really, really incredible individuals who are giving back to the community in a number of diverse and really excellent ways. And some of you may have met her recently. Her term began in January. This is Paige Pierce. She is our newest Youth Poet Laureate. Now, the Youth Poet Laureate is known as the Young People's Poet. Their responsibility is to raise awareness of poetry, the literary arts, and to make a positive the positive impact of literature and poetry, and how it can contribute to community life. Now, for Paige, the focus there is on the youth component of that. So she's really looking to engage a younger literary community to bring those young people together and really celebrate the literary arts in a variety of different ways. We do have a poet laureate, Kamal Parmar, who is still serving, so she's also able to mentor Paige for 6 months at the beginning of Paige's term here as well. So speaking of projects we're doing, we currently have a youth book response, a poetry contest that's happening right now. The deadline is actually the 12th, so coming right up. And this is what we partnered with the Vancouver or the Harbourfront Library on. And we were asking for youth under the age of 18 to write a poem in response to a favorite book. And so when they have done this, when they've submitted these poems, we're actually going to be displaying them at the library, displaying all the poems that are submitted. They'll be reviewed by Paige herself, and giving the youth an opportunity to meet. We will likely have a reading if they choose to participate, and we'll be giving out prizes as well to 3 selected poems as part of that process. And this is Kamal Parmar that you see on the screen. She is our current poet laureate, so her term will be ending in August. And this is a recent project we did with Kamal called Poetry in the Park. And this was a really unique way of trying to bring poetry into the community in a maybe unexpected way and also in an unexpected environment. So how you might engage with this particular project is you'd be walking in Bowen Park and you could be seeking it out, or you might just stumble upon a sticker in a particular location, quite large stickers that have a QR code on them, along with a couple lines of poetry from one of Kamal's poems. When you access that QR code, it brings up a video of Kamal in that location reading that poem. Now we were also, and there's a variety of locations throughout Bowen Park that you can find these stickers and these QR codes. Now we were also very aware when it comes to accessibility that there's going to be some people that can't access those spaces in the park. These poems are available through the city's YouTube channel, so they are available just right now through your personal device. But we also liked bringing poetry into a different environment, so there were different ways to be able to engage with that form of literary art. And also it really, really connects with a lot of what Kamal's trying to do in her poetry, which is about healing, which is about nature, and which is about using word and words to access healing in nature. So that was a really unique project we just completed. Now, the temporary public art program is quite enormous. I'll review a couple of the projects that we had on the go. This one was recently installed in the fall. This is David Martinello's piece, Compelling Agency. So this is a large-scale sculpture. If you haven't seen it, it is it's adjacent to the intersection of Fitzwilliam and Wallace Street, so just kind of on the edge of the Old City Quarter. And in this piece, he was drawing attention to the connective value that humans have to wood as a resource. So really looking at the ubiquitous nature of wood in our daily lives. And of course, you'll see the silhouette there being that suggestion of the tree with that piece of cedar in the center of it. And the idea is that that cedar is going to weather and change over time. And so the experience with the piece and the experience with the nature around the piece will change too. And that will change your experience with that public art and change the way you're interacting with it too, as well as just the conversation around wood as a resource. Now, we have been working with 2 artists on the temporary public art for 2024. I didn't mention, by the way, but we look to commission 2 pieces of temporary public art annually, but the art is to be up for a 5-year period. So these pieces, what you're seeing up there are not the pieces that are being installed because they are currently being created. Those are examples of this particular artist's sculptural work. So this is Rob Turriff, and his piece is going to be called Rewilders. Now, in the call for 2024, we put a real focus on public engagement, allowing the public to be a little bit more involved in the process around public art, to feel a bit of ownership there, and also allow the art that is going into these spaces to really become placemaking experiences, because there is site specificity involved. They're not plunked in a random spot. They have something to say about the location where they are being installed. And that's very true of Rob's piece. What he did in the development of Rewilders is he did a youth engagement workshop. So it was called Creature Design, actually. And it was a sellout. I think within a day we had just everybody in our inboxes wanting into this workshop. It was a free workshop, and the youth got to work with Rob for that day in developing. Rob had printed all sorts of, little 3D printed pieces that the kids worked with him on developing creatures. Now, the entire messaging is around invasive ivy, which is currently kind of taking over the Colliery Dam area. And so the kids were creating, there was a lot of conversation about that ivy, what that meant, what native plants meant, what invasive plants did to the environment. And so they were creating creatures that could land in that environment, remove the invasive ivy, and then potentially be replanting native plants. So the kids were coming up with mythology around the little creatures they created. And in the end, the kids ended up voting. They all told the story behind their piece. The kids voted on their top 3 that they'd selected, and then Rob is actually taking those 3 and developing his own large-scale version of them, and those pieces will be going into Colliery Dam Park. So it's really neat. Rob is calling the kids his co-collaborators, so the whole process will be spoken about on the signage when it comes to the park. And there's other elements as well, like he's developing little animations that'll go along with it. So when you're looking at the sign, kids can access all these animations that bring the creatures to life. And it also allows for that engagement piece and that educational piece to really further the understanding of the development of that project and the meaning behind it as well. This is the other project. This is by Elliot Whitehill. Now, Elliot is Nanaimo, and this project will be going into the Old City Quarter. This is a really, really unique project because it's a bit of a quote-unquote invisible artistic intervention into public space, because this is actually going to be a multimedia project where there will be a number of speakers hidden in discrete places throughout the Old City Quarter that will be playing sounds of native species to that land. Specifically, Elliot's doing research and looking at the history of the land where Nanaimo now sits prior to settlement. So looking at what a lot of animals continue to live in this area. A lot of birds will continue to live in this area, but perhaps those that have since moved because of the influx of people living in that environment, looking at recording some of those sounds. And so when you move in that space, there'll be a part of that where you become part of this artistic piece without necessarily recognizing it initially. There will be a didactic element to it. There is going to be some signage which connects to a website that speaks a little bit more to that research and the development of it, as well as the species involved. And of course, there's a lot of considerations as well about how those sound pieces will be going into that space so that it's not, birds blaring at you all of a sudden and terrifying you when you're standing on a corner. So it's done in a way that is very natural, that's not very abrupt, and certainly wouldn't be disturbing people in the space either. So it'll be quite an interesting project as it develops. It's currently in that research and recording phase, actually. And this is our urban design roster. You, whether you know it or not, have probably seen a number of projects connected to this roster in and around town. We recently put in place a new roster. So this program began in 2021. And the artists that are appointed to the roster serve a 2-year term. So this is the new term from 2024 to 2026. And the artists and designers that are appointed to the roster have an opportunity to be involved in civic urban design, usually small-scale artwork connected to civic infrastructure. So we had 21 artists and designers that were appointed to the new roster, and that included 9 new and 12 returning. And so when you're going around town and you see I think the most common that you'd probably see are the artistic wraps around traffic kiosks, for example, that we tend to be engaging artists from the roster, or the mural at the washroom down at Maffeo Sutton Park. That would be a project from the urban design roster, or the recently announced manhole covers that the group A Lilam were part of designing. So a lot of ways that we'll incorporate these artists are in projects that are already happening. So looking at an engineering project that's going in anyways, and how can we incorporate arts and culture? Because really arts and culture can be integrated into so many functional ways in and around town as a way of beautifying space, as a way of placemaking. And so there's just an incredible amount of projects that we have underway. And certainly with this new roster in place and with me in this position, I'm able to curate this in ways that allow as many artists as possible an opportunity to be involved, but I'm also looking at what's going where and who might be the appropriate artists to engage in very particular projects to benefit both the community but the artists themselves. So as an example, this is the ticket kiosk that is up at the Aquatica Center. And this was Noel Brown that did this design for us last year, actually, and turned out pretty phenomenal. We have so many of these coming. I could have put a lot more pictures up there, but these are just a couple that are more recent. This is Sarita Milk, who did the upper design that is currently being installed, and then Robert Plant, you can see his rendering. This is an example of some of the kiosks that are going in a variety of different places, some very, very large scale kiosks, and then some smaller scale. Almost always when it comes to these kiosks, we're looking at the neighborhood or the environment the kiosks going into so that we can shape theme around what's going to work for that space, as well as what artists would value the most or be able to contribute the most to a particular project. So we've been able to give a lot of opportunities so far. And then finally, this is a fun program we've been doing. This is up at the Aquatic Center. There is a space, I didn't know it before, but I guess it was a little cafe space, a lot of you would have known, that was kind of sitting there empty. This is a sort of temporary program that we've been doing for the time being to really enliven that space. And so what we did was, these are student exhibitions that are going up there. I've been able to engage a number of schools. This is École Pauline Herrera, and then we had NDSS doing a show, and we actually have École Pauline Herrera up there again right now, where we've been able to showcase some student work in that space and constantly changing exhibitions. We're likely through the summer going to look at showcasing some other youth group works as well. But it's been a really exciting project because it is quote unquote easy to carry out, at least compared to some of the other projects I have on the go, but the payoff is just huge. It's enormous for a lot of these kids to come into this space and see their artwork on display, and it's just a really nice way of highlighting some of that youth talent in the community as well. Now, as I said, that was a very, very broad overview. I didn't touch on a whole lot when it comes to specific issues of inclusion and accessibility, but it certainly is integrated into pretty much everything I'm doing, especially with the art calls. But if you have any questions or feedback, certainly you're welcome to ask or let me know right now. But I'd be very curious to hear feedback when it comes to your own experiences with culture in the community, or public art in the community as well, because I think for myself, one of the most exciting things about public art is that it is in public space and that it is meant to be an accessible public space. So that's really the core of a public art program. So thank you very much. And yeah, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. We'll start with Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful work there. I have a few questions and then some feedback, which is also a question. Are the poems, are Camel's poems captioned?
They are, actually.
They are?
Yes, yeah,
Great.
I didn't mention it. Thank you for asking. Yes, we did everything in-house, so we actually, and it's not the automatic captions, it is input captions on YouTube, you bet.
Great. And is there thought, and I understand this is a complicated question, but I love the idea of the Elliott Whitehill's installation. Is there thought into how people who are deaf or hard of hearing might be able to experience that installation in some way?
I was thinking about it actually when I was sitting back there, his project as well as some of these other signs that go along with public art projects, someone that might not be able to read the sign and different ways to access that information. So certainly it's now on my mind and I am going to discuss it with Elliott because one of the most interesting things about looking at any of these public art projects is really looking at the different platforms of access. And so being able to look at someone who cannot access it this way, well, we do have other tools available to us. So what can we do that will be beneficial and will actually, broaden that sort of access? So for sure, I'll put that on my list.
Great. And my final note, which you may not have an answer to, but it's just a question. So I think, and I'm born and raised on Vancouver Island, so one of the things that I observe over time is that art often thematically focuses on outdoor spaces. And I would say that that's a reflection of the art we've seen here, is thematically there's a lot of focus on nature. Of course, it's a huge attractor for the people that come here. That's why so many people come here, mountains, trees, hiking, all that fun stuff. That being said, many of those spaces are not accessible, so they don't reflect the experience of people who benefit most from accessibility and inclusion. So when people who require those things see the art, they don't see themselves reflected in the art that exists in public spaces. And I wonder if there's plans ongoing to look at how we might diversify some of our art to reflect the experiences of people who may have limited access to those spaces or people who benefit directly from accessibility and inclusion. Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful comment and a really, really important topic. I obviously have spent my life working in the arts, so I find the different ways of accessing art to be absolutely fascinating, and it is something we're looking at because, as I say, a huge focus of what we're looking at in the public art program is public engagement, and a big part of that is accessibility as well. And the wonderful thing as technology changes in the art sphere as well is that we're seeing the development of such diverse art projects. So whether that is the incorporation of light and installation or interactive elements in those art pieces or functional art pieces going into public spaces as well, so that absolutely you may have standalone sculptural pieces, but that we really can broaden what the view is of public art, how it intervenes in public space. We're certainly doing that as well, because I think the more we broaden that definition and look at how we are putting those pieces into public space and how people can interact with them, then we are broadening that access as well and making it, I think, more intriguing for a general public as well, but certainly more engaging as well. So yeah, really valuable feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to that point, what stories the art is telling. So if the art is telling stories of outdoor spaces, that's great. But what other stories is it telling that aren't necessarily linked to those spaces, but different experiences?
Absolutely.
Jocelyn, please.
It's so cool to hear your presentation because I was just at the Land Summit at the Convention Center, and the door I came out, which I understand is it's not an access door, it's an exit. And I saw the woven sculpture, which I took a photo of because I thought it was so cool. And I'm obviously a knitter, and so like fiber art's a really intriguing thing for me. And it makes me sad because it's like at a place no one can go into, and it's in like, forgive me for saying so, but the butt end of the convention center. Like, how do you get there? You know? And so I would love to see, I mean, I can't comment on the other stuff, but that is a hard one, and I feel bad for the artists.
That's a bit of a longer story because it was before my time, but I know it involves something to do with insurance. So it was a bit of logistics there. So I think that was the solution in being able to still make it work and show that in public space, because that piece was part of the temporary public art program and is now owned by the city. That's Peter A. Church's Seabed. It is a really wonderful piece, and of course all of those elements of it are things he collected on the beach. You know, it was discarded materials along the beach. So there's that outdoor element, and yeah, there is a bit of a cognitive disconnect of having it in an indoor space. I think it really came down to the logistics of how it was installed. But I do absolutely see your point. It's a wonderful piece, but there's limitations in how it is installed. Yeah.
It's also like 2 elevators to get to it, and it's like it's just a really hard part of the indoor space there to get to. So it's just like kind of a comment. I admired it, and it felt a little sad that it probably doesn't get up many looks at it, because you exit and you don't even look back.
Yeah,
like
I can understand
that. Here I am, like being an art expert, but this is something I feel really strongly about, because I found as a person, I was born with my disability, and of all of the sort of sectors I've engaged with as a resident and a citizen in various cities I've lived in, art is the one that I have experienced the most barriers. And I find that often like high property values and costs for gallery space and all that stuff, you know, those spaces are a little more rare than like the basketball courts and the playgrounds. And so there are more barriers to participating in art, and art, you know, both presented and participated in most cities. And I experienced that a couple of times the first year I lived in Nanaimo. There was like an organization that did an inclusive like music presentation. It was in a completely inaccessible location. So like I would say in response to all the amazing things you're doing, I would love to see how you consider engaging people with disabilities of various kinds, like you said, in representation, but also recognizing the barriers to disabled artists I wouldn't like suggest a quota, but like some way to sort of be more representative of that sector, given all the barriers that there are. And with the temporary public art and the art wrapped around infrastructure, which is so cool, you know, given the limitations around transportation for people with physical disabilities, like is there anywhere people can go see that online or in a video or in like a calendar? Like it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, so you just sparked something that's very much on my brain, because as I say, public engagement is a huge piece of what I want to develop around the public art program, and looking at tours, and specifically virtual tours, but doing them in a way, I'm specifically thinking about an app that's being developed out of Calgary by a friend of mine, and he is in a wheelchair, and he's developing an app where you can actually access and know what building you're going to be able to go into, you know, throughout public space where you can access, so to take away some of that anxiety. And I thought a lot about when he was developing that, how wonderful it would be in what we develop in a virtual forum, whether you are going to go out and seek something out yourself or whether you want an online platform to find that, but finding a way to share those spaces in a really accessible, potentially online platform is absolutely on my mind. I think it will be a very important part of the development of that public engagement piece, because as I've said, I really do want to broaden the access to that work. You know, it's wonderful work, but I do understand that there can be a lot of barriers to accessing it. I also do really appreciate what you said about, you know, the art world, that it can be very hard to access the art you appreciate or the art you want to participate in. You know, I've worked in the arts my whole life, which means I haven't been able to afford the art that I love so much. So it is sort of a challenge in being in a field of passion, and I've always been very aware of that. And the wonderful thing about working in a municipality is that you have direction to really find the barriers and do something about them. So it's wonderful when it comes to incorporating in public art into whether it's city projects or city events. and know that that is a priority, that we can really look at this being, an event that's incorporating in these various installations, and you have free access, and it's not limited to certain hours. And so those that might be experiencing financial barriers, or that art is spread in a way where it's not one location that is very hard to access, or where you have to have anxiety about parking or whatever it is, the more options the better. And then the other thing I was going to mention as well is that we are definitely making a focus in our calls as well, our art calls. We now have a section on inclusion and accessibility that speaks to, we always have encouraged applications from those that might be experiencing barriers, but we really wanted to make it a lot more clear in those calls, and then also make it a point of saying, because I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what barriers someone might find in an application process. So saying, if you are experiencing barriers, we're committed to, eliminating those barriers. So we're here to support you, and if even the application process itself is posing a barrier to you, then reach out. We're here to provide that support. So doing what we can in that process to hopefully learn and then be able to improve every way we're approaching those programs. Yeah, but thank you very much. I relate to a lot of what you said, and yeah, all really valuable comments.
If I can follow up, there's a lot of apps around accessibility, and I just urge you not to complicate it too much. Like, just a place that you can flip through the art and the locations in case someone wants to see it or something. Like, I think there's a lot of great opportunities that apps and technology bring, but I think there's lots of middle ground too, like first steps and stuff like that.
Things I could do versus someone from IT. Yes, absolutely.
Strong point. Okay, I have Tammy and then Richard.
Just wanted to touch on that accessibility barriers. So the QR codes in Bowen Park and Colorado Dam, is there Wi-Fi access in those spaces? Like, I know Bowen,
there's not, no, and that could potentially be a limitation. We do actually say that in all the materials as well, that it requires data access. And so in all the materials we put out, we did make it clear that if you're not able to access it in that environment, or we had feedback from someone saying, I don't want to carry around my phone, absolutely you can access from other platforms for sure, yeah.
And to that point, I think we're also getting a lot more cautious generally about using QR codes, because they can be, people can make a fake QR code and slap a sticker over it, and you take a photo of it, and not to give anyone any ideas, but it's just something that you have to be more aware of as people take advantage of this technology. So knowing that there's other ways people can access it is an important thing for sure. Richard.
I think whenever we are creating these pieces of art that are going into public spaces, I think if we had, say, in the accessibility section of, I don't know, that administration building within the aquatic center that just got a piece of artwork installed that's behind a piece of glass, if we had specifically in the accessibility section of the say swimming pool or that building or space, a description of the piece of artwork. So that's if someone with say low vision was trying to maybe experience it, they can't actually because it's behind glass. So they can't feel the tiles that are hidden behind. Things like this can be done for a lot of the public spaces that we also have. So say at Maffeo Sutton Park, if we have a page online kind of giving the descriptions of the work as if a curator is talking about the piece in its space and describing it there, that would be also fantastic. The Nanaimo Art Gallery has been doing more of this kind of inclusive design to try and get more inclusion for underrepresented folks, and there is a group in Toronto called Tangled Art Gallery that often works to try and overcome these sort of accessibility barriers. So when I heard, for instance, the installation of the audio-based piece, I was elated, to say the least, because all right, finally some art that's for my people. So yes, it's maybe a little bit of a downside to those with hearing impairments, but for me with a keen ear to my surroundings, it's something that like people with low vision will definitely appreciate in those spaces, because then we're being considered more often whenever these pieces are being created. So yeah, I don't know if it's possible to ever take, like, say if a piece of a sculpture is behind glass, to have like times where the glass can like be removed or something. That would be also pretty nice. Or if a piece like the descriptions of the wood creation, if it was like a lower height, so then someone who has a lower viewpoint, let's say, can experience it from a better angle. I think these are all ways that are able to make the art more inclusive by nature. So yeah, thank you very much for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. That's really valuable. We definitely have been putting in, for example, with the temporary public art signs that are going along with the pieces. They have been going down at a level where I think anybody with a lower viewpoint could have access to them. But that comment about descriptive captions is actually really valuable, because that's something that can easily be incorporated into the signs that are going into those spaces, which provide additional information. So I'm definitely going to take that back as we are looking at this spring, installing quite a few different projects to incorporate in that sort of addition to the signage and that accessibility. So that was really valuable. Thank you.
I'm going to Vay and then to Sean.
Hey, I was just wondering about the artists that get selected for these works. Are they typically professional artists or formally trained artists, or is it are amateurs welcome to participate?
So great question. We do have a definition in the call of what we consider an artist. So in the temporary public art call, it does require some experience. So there is sort of some defined points around being an artist, and I believe it's 2 years to have been working as an artist. And what was the other part of your question?
Roster.
The roster, the panel, right. So, sorry to interrupt you, as you were asking about the decision making and how the artists are selected, correct?
Yes, just partly is, it's quite difficult to be a professional artist for 2 years. So I see there's a lot of talented people in the community who might be getting completely just disqualified from the start.
Yeah, and I could be quoting it wrong, because to be honest, I'm not looking at the call right in front of me. I'd say the temporary public art call is quite a fair definition of how it defines artist, because one of the exciting things about the temporary public art call is actually that it's not $1 million budget. So it really is accessible to a lot of emerging artists who haven't necessarily intervened in public space. Same goes for the urban design roster. We actually do encourage artists who are emerging and perhaps have not been engaged in those sorts of projects before. So certainly there is a focus on allowing artists like that an opportunity. When it comes to the selection, I don't make that decision myself. There is a panel involved that incorporates includes our Art and Public Spaces working group. And so there's a variety of perspectives brought to that selection too. And certainly we don't overlook artists with less experience, because it really comes down to the viability of the proposal as well. And so we do get a lot of proposals from emerging artists. And yeah, I certainly appreciate what you say, absolutely, because it can be very challenging. You need the experience to be able to apply for a lot of opportunities as emerging artists. And I would say our calls are pretty inclusive that way.
And Sean.
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, make the question that when we're communicating these initiatives out to the public, that we're inclusive with how we communicate them. So just an observation, and in my work, I'm the word police too, so I'm going to be the word police here, and I'm very sorry because I loved the presentation. But when you were talking about the poetry in park, 3 words that emerged were when you walk through the park and you see a QR code, you can click the thing and hear something. And for people who aren't able to walk through the park, when we say walk through the park and do that, it's a bit of a micro thing where they're like, oh, well, I'm not walking through the park, so I can't experience that, or I can't see it, or I can't hear it. So just to, I guess, I understand we're not the greater public that you're communicating these things to, but is all that stuff considered when you're doing that sort of community outreach to make sure that the language in press releases, in media communications is inclusive, that we're not unintentionally excluding someone because they might not experience things in the same way?
No, I actually really do appreciate that, because I think those are, and I like being called out on that, because I think those are sort of those things that, I just say and don't recognize what that actually could mean to someone, and that I could be excluding someone in language I'm using. Thankfully, when it comes to, versus me speaking off the cuff, when it comes to a lot of the material we're putting out there, it goes through a lot more than me. So it absolutely is a priority to make sure that we are using inclusive language, but I do also appreciate comments like that, so it checks me, and so that I can kind of be aware of that and improve the way I speak to those projects as well. So thank you.
And I see a final comment question or comment from Wendy.
Hello, while we've been talking about this, I was thinking about October is Community Inclusion Month. And I'm wondering if we could have something out in the public featuring people who paint in the community. It may not be professional or anything like that, but it would be a voice out there showing that people with diverse abilities can do things. And that would be in October.
So I appreciate the comment. One of the really nice things, Meg spoke to it from the event side of things, but one of the other parcels of what I do is the cultural grants, which include operating and project grants. And so one of the other huge pieces to my job is supporting the arts and culture organizations in and around the community that are providing programs like that. So taking feedback like that to the cultural partners, the groups I'm interacting with. I think one of the strengths in my personal position would be to support the groups that are looking to do that sort of programming. And we're able to do that through funding, but also in a variety of different partnerships. So really interesting idea for October. I hadn't realized that myself. So I'll certainly see what's going on in and around town, but I will, I'll take your feedback for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And I see Richard, you have your hand up there. Maybe it was a holdover from earlier. Okay.
Sorry, I fat fingered. Anyways, I actually did have a thing. So in relation to that, there are many sort of events throughout the year that maybe days that highlight certain disabilities or Pride, for instance, like Disability Pride Month and such. I kind of wonder if, in collaboration with the events team, if say art or cultural events could be kind of highlighted, or calls for art to be created in relation to these types of events could kind of be coordinated more to be able to show the diversity within our community and to bring light to those sort of underrepresented groups as well at the same time, because I think it would be a great kind of combination in relation to the two presentations that we've had today. So
I very much agree. I can't speak too much to it at the moment because it involves a grant I haven't achieved yet. But certainly in my own mind, I think there is huge opportunity to do exactly what you're saying. in that marriage of events and that arts and cultural field. We certainly, of course, encourage it with the organizations we support through our grants programs, because through our project and operating grants, the mandate of those organizations must have a arts and culture focus. So there's a variety of ways that will be happening with those various organizations, and we certainly are funding a lot of really phenomenal projects that'll be coming. But from our own point of view, yes, I think there's huge potential to really incorporate in those opportunities those underrepresented groups, particularly in being part of that process and how we bring arts and culture to be part of those events, and beyond maybe one singular event, which might be too much for some people to be able to access or want to be part of on that particular day. So sort of expanding the opportunities to engage with the art that's involved with those events. I realize I'm speaking about that very broadly, but just to say it's definitely on my mind. And yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Thank you, Richard. So not seeing any other comments, and we had a really good discussion about this, so thank you to the committee and thank you so much for the presentation. And so that is our final presentation. We have no reports, nothing under other business. Question period. Not seeing, oh, and Jocelyn. Of course you can say something.
Thanks. I think people might know that there's an accessibility standards engagement period coming up with the province of BC, and I think it's something that it affects all of us, whether we have a disability or we love or support people with disabilities or just want our cities to be accessible. It's really important to participate, and my organization is considering doing some events, something online, but I was curious whether the city or the library even maybe might have some interest in hosting an opportunity to engage the public around accessibility standards and sort of taking a bit of a leadership role or a supportive role on that. Because there are lots of stakeholders here, not just people with disabilities, but I would love to, I think there's a lot of folks who feel pretty urgently about it because it goes out for consultation to a very large, all kinds of stakeholders, and we just want to make sure that the voices of people with disabilities and groups that support them, etc., are heard. So my understanding is that the tools and the sort of process for engagement have not yet been released, but will in the next few weeks, and that the engagement period is from the end of May to the end of July, which is not ideal, but it's what we have. So
basically,
yeah, and before we lose everyone to vacations in summer and stuff like that. Anyway. So putting that up as a question, and Spinal Cord Injury BC, my organization is doing an adaptive cycling barbecue at Butman Park whenever we can get the site locked down, and on June 15th. And it's kind of open, we have to RSVP, but I'll send by email the info. Anyone wants to come and check it out and have a hot dog.
Okay, that's awesome to know about. So perhaps if there isn't a way for us to formally host some type of engagement, if you can send the information to myself and Councillor Armstrong, and then we can make sure that's circulated to the committee. If there's any way we can facilitate that, because I think that we won't have another meeting probably before that. So, but I appreciate you flagging that for sure. Okay. And as I said earlier, we'll follow up with the information about the transit fare review. And yeah, just a reminder, if you do have items for upcoming agendas or things to share with the committee, please feel free to send it my way and I can share it with everyone. Okay, so we didn't have anything official on the question period sheet, so that brings us to adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Well, just before we adjourn, sorry. I just had one more note, which is that it's the Inclusive BC conference in Nanaimo at the end of the month. Everybody belongs, so that's a good opportunity, and it's all downtown, so that's just something for the city to be aware of. I know it was brought up at the last meeting. If don't know if anything has happened around that, but I think it's a good opportunity to ensure, because most of the people that are coming to that, or many of the people that are coming to that, and it's a sold out conference, so many of the people that are coming are gonna have accessibility needs. So that's something that it's not much time to put stuff in place, but there is stuff that the city can do to make the downtown specifically a more accessible space that is probably going to be pretty long.
Awesome, okay, I'm gonna follow up on that for sure. All right, we're really gonna do adjournment this time. So if I could have a motion to adjourn, moved by Nicole, seconded by Jocelyn, all in favor?